Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, brothers and sisters. It's been a while since I've made a video reading the Risale-i Nur. I'm really sorry I haven't, but alhamdulillah, I am back, and inshallah, we can continue reading the third word. Now, before we pick up right from where we left off, I would like to read some of what we've already read, or rather, summarize, look at it. So, the Risale-i Nur tells us that the source of courage is belief in God and worship. So, courage, right? So, having the moral or mental strength to persevere or withstand through some sort of danger or difficulty. Courage stems from belief and worship. Okay, and it says with every iniquity the source of cowardice is misguidance. So cowardice, which is the opposite of courage, stems from misguidance. Now, in order to show us what this means, the Risale-i gives us an example, okay, a comparison. So it talks about a worshiper with a truly illuminated heart and compares that worshiper with a famous degenerate philosopher with a so-called enlightened mind. Okay? Now, when the worshiper sees the globe of the earth explode, he's not terrified. He's not terrified, and in fact, he's even awed by what he sees. He sees it as a manifestation of God's power. But when the philosopher sees a comet in the sky, he gets terrified, and he even asks, "Isn't that comet going to hit the Earth?" Now, the reason that the worshipper is not terrified, even when the globe of the Earth explodes, is because the worshipper knows that the universe is under God's control. And he also knows that even if he dies, the worshipper would just go to the afterlife, right? Because he's not going to perish into non-existence. But for the philosopher's perspective is different, right? And we've talked about this before in my videos. Like we talked about this in the second word when reading the second word. Belief impacts your vision of the world. So if you have belief, you will see the universe, right? You will see the world in a very positive way. But if you don't have belief, you will see the world in a very negative way. And we do see this very finely illustrated with this comparison. The philosopher is terrified because he doesn't recognize God who reigns supreme over the universe. Think about it like this, right? Would you like it if, let's say a country was in a state of anarchy? Okay, so there's no government. If it's in a state of anarchy, right, there's no justice, there's no administration, right? There are like foreign threats coming and you don't have an army to counter them, right? You wouldn't feel safe if there was anarchy. But when there is a government, right, that is administering everything, that is protecting the country from external threats, you would feel more safe, right? There's also justice and whatnot, right? So for the philosopher sees the universe in a state of anarchy, whereas the worshipper sees the universe in a state under the control of God, right? So he knows everything is under God's control. Also, the philosopher doesn't believe in the afterlife because he doesn't believe in God to begin with. Okay, he doesn't believe in God, and he doesn't believe in afterlife, right? We've talked about this, the fear of death, right? The philosopher is afraid of death. Why? Because he doesn't want to die and become nothing. That's just terrifying. But for the worshipper, it's not that terrifying because if he dies, he'll just go to the afterlife, right? There's a continuation, okay? So we see that the source of courage, right? The reason the worshipper had this courage was because he had belief and because he worshipped God. But the reason the philosopher, on the other hand, was so terrified is because he didn't believe in God. He didn't worship him. Okay. So, and we're going to look back at what we've just read, what we just looked at when we read this next paragraph. Yes, although man is in need of numberless things, his capital is as nothing, and although he is subject to endless calamities, his power too is as nothing. Simply, his capital and power extend only as far as his hand can reach. However, his hopes, desires, pains, and tribulations reach as far as the eye and imagination can stretch. Anyone who is not totally blind can see and understand then what a great profit, happiness, and bounty for the human spirit, which is thus impotent and weak, and needy and wanting, our worship, affirmation of God's unity, and reliance on God and submission to him. So let's just stop here and try to understand what the Risale-i is telling us. So, says here, yes, although man is in need of numberless things. So here the Risale-i is telling us we have endless needs, okay? Man has endless needs. And, we don't just constantly need, for example, food and water and oxygen, also good health, right? We need our faculties to be working. The needs that we have are not just confined to this life. What I mean by that is we also have this very intense desire for immortality. This is discussed in the Risale-i. We don't want to die and become nothing, right? For example, we just looked at the philosopher, right? Why is the philosopher terrified of death, right? Like, why is he terrified of the comet? Because he doesn't want to die and become nothing. Right? He doesn't want to perish into non-existence. No one would want to perish into non-existence. Okay? So one very innate, like a need that we have, a very intense need that we have, is the need for an eternal life. Okay? And it says here, his capital is as nothing. Now, capital, in this context, capital actually refers to everything that we have. So it doesn't just refer to our wealth, it also refers to our human faculties, right? Our mind, our eyes, right? Our nose, and other faculties as well. These are also considered our capital, okay? Now, when it says his capital is as nothing, it means that the capital we have cannot secure our endless needs, okay? So, for example, we have the need for immortality. Well, our wealth, our capital, our faculties cannot help us attain an eternal life, right? You could be very rich, you could have millions or even billions of dollars, and you can't live forever, right? Just like everyone else, you're going to enter the grave, right? And it says here, although he's subjected to endless calamities, his power too is as nothing. So what this means is we're always experiencing calamities in life, okay? A calamity, if you search it up, is a catastrophic event. Now, obviously a calamity doesn't have to be something very, like, it doesn't have to go to a very large extent, right? Because all the problems and challenges that we experience in life, these can also be considered calamities, right? So, for example, maybe a difficult financial situation, maybe a sickness, or something else. These can be considered calamities, and as human beings, we're always going through calamities. And it says here, his power to us is nothing. So, our power cannot protect us from these calamities that we're experiencing in life, okay? In fact, our power is not only very limited, the only power we have is actually our free will, okay? Now, free will is, I just want to quickly define it, free will is, of course, having the ability to choose between having the ability to choose between two or more options, okay? So, for example, I have the free will to either, for example, play a game of chess or, for example, read a book, okay? I have the free will to I have the choice of committing a good deed or committing a misdeed, okay? I have the free will to help someone or harm someone, right? These are just a few examples of free will. The only power we actually have is our free will. Now, you might be thinking, Cameron, don't I have the power to do other things? Well, what I mean here is that when our only power is free will, all of our actions are created by God, right? So, for example, I'm just making this video, right? I'm reading this book, or, for example, when I want to play a game of chess, all of these actions that I'm doing are created by God. The only thing I can do is want to do these things, right? So with my free will, I want to read this book, or with my free will, I want to play a game of chess. God creates those actions. I'm incapable of creating those actions myself, right? Just think about it. You can't make your own heart work, right? You can't make your own blood circulate, right? You can't make your liver perform, different vital functions, right? You can't make any of those things happen, right? And some of the external functions that you seem to control are actually created by God, right? Every action that you do is created by God. The only thing that we actually have is our free will, okay? So we're experiencing these endless calamities, but the power that we have, the very limited power we have, our free will, is unable to protect us from these calamities. And it says here simply, his capital and power extend only as far as his hand can reach. So it goes to a very limited extent. It's very limited, okay? However, his hopes, desires, pains, and tribulations reach as far as the imagination can stretch. So on the other hand, the hopes that we have, the desires, the things that we want, the pains that we experience, and the tribulations, right, the difficulties that we go through, the challenges, reach as far as the eye and imagination can stretch. So they go to a very long extent. So our capital and our power is very limited, but all these difficulties that we go through in life, all of these pains that we experience, all of these desires that we have, go to a very go to a very far extent. Okay? Anyone who is not totally blind can see and understand then what a great profit, happiness, and bounty for the human spirit, which is thus impotent and weak and needy and wanting, are worship, affirmation of God's unity, and reliance on God and submission to Him. So, as you might have been able to tell, we're in a bit of a difficult situation, right? Because, we have endless needs. We're also experiencing these endless calamities, but our capital and our power is very limited. So what do? Right? Think about it like this. Human, right, man is kind of like someone in a burning village. So kind of think about it in like medieval times, right? You have someone in a village, and that village is just burning, right? It's being attacked by raiders, right? What are you supposed to do, right? You're in a difficult situation. Kind of think of it like that. We're kind of like that. We're just in the middle of a burning village, okay? People are being killed. What do, right? How are you going to save yourself, right? Like, how are you going to be saved, right? What are you going to do in that situation, right? So think of our situation kind of like that. Well, the resigner is telling us that we can make great profit, we can find happiness, and we can find bounty, right? There's bounty for the human spirit, which is thus impotent and weak, and needy and wanting, through worship, affirmation of God's unity, reliance on God, and submission to God, okay? Now, I don't want to just read these things and then just be done with the video. I would like to quickly go over how these things benefit us. So first of all, worship of God. Why does worshiping God help us? Well, it is for a few reasons, and I've talked about this before, which is that worshiping God, first of all, helps us secure our needs, okay? In another paragraph, for example, the Risale gave another example about a man two soldiers who, are ordered to go to a city. One of the soldiers decides to carry a kit bag of rations with them and a rifle with them. By carrying the kit bag of rations, he's able to meet his needs, right? Now, that soldier represents the believer. The believer secures his needs in life, the needs that he has, by worshiping God, okay? So by worshiping God, we're able to secure our needs. Remember, in the beginning of this paragraph, I said we have numberless things. We are in need of numberless things, right? So how do we secure these numberless needs? By worshiping God. Also, worshiping God helps us to build a close connection with God, which is also very nice, right? It talks about how there's great profit and happiness, right? People can be happy by worshiping God, okay? That's number one. Second is affirmation of God's unity. Now, God's unity here is talking about the oneness of God, right? Once again, how does this help us, right? Well, when there's one creator, and I actually watched this video of a professor. He was talking about Islam, and he said the problem with polytheistic religions is that when there's so many deities, it's unclear what you should do, right? But in monotheism, there's one God that you should follow, right? Well, in Islam, there's only one God, right? We don't believe in multiple deities. We believe in one God. The same goes for in Christianity and Judaism, right? There's one God that we follow, and it's very clear what you should do. When we're talking about God here, or when we're talking about deities, people can deify the things in this life as well, right? So they can turn the things in this life also into their God, right? The Quran, for example, talks about how Qarun, who was the cousin of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, he made his desires his God. What does that mean? He deified his desires. Okay? So instead of, for example, instead of relying and submitting to God, right, in order to secure your needs and fortify yourself against his enemies, you can instead, some people might rely on, for example, wealth and power, right? They can rely on things other than God, right? The problem with these things, however, is that they're limited. Okay, these things cannot protect them, right? They're essentially false gods, right? Those deities can't help you, right? Like Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, different prophets have, for example, reproached their communities for asking help from these idols, which can't help them, and that like symbolizes how we can rely on these things in life that can't actually help us, right? You can rely on wealth, you can rely on power, right? You can, I don't know, rely on your position, right? You can rely on these things, but these things can't help you. They don't have any power that can actually help you. Right? In the like pagan religions, the power of the gods are limited. Okay, and the reason for that is because there are multiple deities, right? For example, one god controls something, another god controls something else, right? So obviously their power is limited. They can't control everything. Okay. Well, the things in this life are like that if you deify them are also limited. They cannot help you. So, affirming God's unity is also very beneficial to us. It becomes much more easier and clear when there's one creator to follow. Okay? So that's two. Now, the third one is reliance on God. What do we rely on God for, right? Because if we experience these calamities, we have these needs, we experience hardships in life, what do? We don't rely on God for support. We rely on God for his help, okay? And so this can also really help us. This can also be very beneficial to us. And the fourth and final one is submission to God. There's another example about two men, right? One of the men decides one of the men, like who goes into the country, he sees the universe is under God's control. He's a believer, right? He has belief, but the other man doesn't have belief because because he submits to God, right? Because he submits to God and worships him, he sees the world in a very positive way. But the other man, because he only worships his own desires, right? Because he only worships his own desires, and because he turns away from the religion of God and doesn't submit to him, he ends up becoming very miserable, right? Once again, I mentioned about the philosopher. The philosopher doesn't recognize God. And so in his perspective, the universe descends into a state of anarchy, right? And this leads to him becoming very terrified, right? Once again, would you feel more safe if, there was anarchy, or would you feel more safe if there's a government in place, right? So submitting to God, right, submitting to his will can also bring about great profit, happiness, and bounty, okay? Now, I'm just going to stop here. I hope you guys were able to benefit from this video, and inshallah, I will see you guys next time.